Welcome to the latest episode of the Informing Choices Minipod, the 10th episode in a collaboration with Working the Future and based on their Foresight Focus 24 report that identifies 10 meta trends impacting the future of work. In this episode, we delve into a pressing global issue: climate chaos, building business sustainability for the future of work. As the climate chaos unfolds, it's crucial to understand its relationship with our work environments and the broader economic landscape. So first, we'll explore how the future of work is intertwined with climate sustainability. What does a sustainable work environment look like, and how does it contribute to the broader fight against climate change? Next, we'll think about significant drivers of this trend and get underneath what some of those are. What do they mean? We'll also consider the possible futures of this relationship by 2030, and we'll focus on the optimistic outcome. Could we see a world where businesses thrive by adopting green practices and technologies? I guess there's already plenty of dystopian scenarios out there, so we'll park that for this episode. Lastly, we'll discuss actionable steps that organizations can take right now. With these insights, businesses can prepare not just to mitigate their environmental impact, but to lead the charge towards a sustainable future. Once again, I'm delighted to welcome co-founder of Working the Future, Kat Barnard, to another episode in our collaborative series of podcasts. Kat, welcome back.
Thank you, Steve. Every time you intro these podcasts, I think, what an amazingly generous offer that you made to spin these up. And it's just such a wonderful opportunity to dive more deeply into our thinking and try a bit of collective sense making.
And one of the things that strikes me as we kind of get towards the end of this series is how the nature of what we're talking about is so connected, and that just completely fascinates me.
Yeah, everything is interconnected. You can't really skim off any of the trends and treat them in isolation, because to do so reduces them to something that is more complicated and less complex. And the fact of the matter is, all of the challenges that we're attempting to address in our Foresight Focus report are complex and ever shape-shifting. So even though to some who are new to these themes, they might be quite overwhelming and quite difficult to get your head around, to reduce them to kind of trivia is not, I don't think, the right thing to do. I think we have to mind bend, right? We have to get in the zone of discomfort to get comfortable with what we're facing.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. We've got a big one today, haven't we? The climate chaos. So let's start with this. What is the relationship between work in the future and climate sustainability, do you think?
It's $1 million question, and again, it's very hard to answer that question in a short enough period to be valuable to our listeners. I think, you could ask me that question and I could probably spend a couple of hours unraveling it. But I guess the easiest way that I think about this is, what is the commercial end goal of an organization? What is it producing? What raw materials does it require to produce? What is the carbon impact of both the extraction of the raw materials and the production method? What impacts do those kind of creative methods have on the environment? And then the way in which work is executed, what is the impact there on the environment, and what can be done to reduce the impact? So immediately, as I say that, I'm very aware it's not a straightforward answer, but I think in a nutshell, we need to, in each organization, deeply understand what is the value that is created by the organization, what is the carbon cost of that value creation? Does it involve raw materials? Does it involve production? If it's a knowledge economy business, where are the carbon costs? What is very contemporary issue? What is the carbon footprint of an office-based premises, an office-based working environment versus an all remote-based working environment? And then, and I know this is you know, perhaps it's interconnected, but perhaps slightly more meta, you know, what are the most sustainable ways in which we can work, and how do we shore up our operating resilience if the people that work within our organization are hit by extreme weather events? Because I think this year is going to be the third or fourth year that we've seen extreme weather events in Europe, like extreme temperatures. I think we were probably all saddened by the news of, you know, the death of Michael Mosley this weekend. And one of the things that struck me was the reporting of the temperatures in the Greek islands, and that he had gone out for a walk in temperatures exceeding 40 degrees. Well, 40 degrees in the earliest part of June, that's a lot. And we've got July, August to get through. You know, so extreme weather events are going to have an adverse effect on how people work. Can they commute? Can they get into the office? What is the impact of drought on people? What's the impact of heat on people? What's the impact of flooding? You know, we've had flooding in the UK. What does it mean for a workforce when various members of the workforce have had their homes flooded? Is their mind going to be on work, or is it going to be on trying to salvage something out of the ruins of their lives? As I say, I fully get that none of this, there are no easy answers, but I think the most helpful and courageous thing that any of us can do right now is just open ourselves up to all the questions.
I really like that about opening up to the questions. I mean, we're really, I suppose, we're addressing the most wicked of wicked problems here, aren't we? Thinking about how society interacts within the context of a rapidly changing climate. And even some of the apparent solutions, staying at home and perhaps using technology to help us do our jobs, isn't immune from a potential impact around the climate debate. So if we're using, I don't know, blockchain and increasingly generative AI and other AI applications, then actually they're powered by energy that needs to be generated. So, I mean, it's immensely complicated, isn't it?
It really, really is. It really is. And I think, you know, as far as I've learned anything about systems thinking, and I do not consider myself to be any kind of expert in this area, I think what I believe I've learned about systems thinking and complexity is quite simply this, and I will absolutely stand to be corrected by you, Steve. But, you know, a complicated system ultimately has edges to it. Therefore, if you conduct enough root cause analysis, you will eventually reach the edges of the complicated system, whereas a complex system has no edges. It's almost, you know, organic and biological in nature, and it's forever shape-shifting. But the point being that actually we need urgently to become much better critical thinkers at work, and we need to become much better systems thinkers at work, so that we can at least acknowledge the interconnectedness of things and how all of these things play out. And actually, one of the things that I worry about is the oversimplification of the climate crisis, because it's not simply a question of measuring carbon emissions. It's also to do with biodiversity loss. It's to do with our relentless obsession with consumerism and stuff. It's to do with the way in which we don't think systemically about what we're here to do. And bluntly, you know, we're coming out of a prolonged period of economic security. And while I fully appreciate that the last 3-4 years have been anything but secure, I still think there's an overarching narrative to try and revert us back into peak capitalism and mass consumerism. And, you know, if we just carry on doing all of these things, then everything will be okay. And if we don't carry on doing all of these things, spending all the money that we don't necessarily have on stuff that we don't really need, that certainly isn't making us any happier, if we don't do these things, we'll destroy the system. And then what? And it's a little bit like we were talking off air. You know, there are overarching narratives that all point to a very dystopian future, and I think that may or may not be the case, but the one thing that we cannot do without is hope and optimism. And I'm not advocating for false optimism. I think I'm a pragmatic realist. But these systems are all man-made, and we ultimately do have agency to remake them for the betterment of society at large.
And I think going back to something we've also touched on a number of times already today, and also through the other episodes, the need to kind of surface these conversations to be realistic about the nature of complexity, the nature of uncertainty, the pace and scale of change. Perhaps we've been tempted too often to try and simplify things when actually we need to get used to thinking about the complex nature of things and work within those to produce better solutions, more optimistic.
And that's the juxtaposition, really, isn't it? That's the challenge, because human brains are hardwired, beg your pardon, for simplicity. We want stability. We crave stability. We want to know that things are fixable.
Yeah.
And I think they are fixable, but the risk that we run is to overplay simplicity.
Yeah.
And I think they're fixable when we are vulnerable enough to acknowledge the complexity of these things. And yeah, that's a big thing, isn't it? You know, nobody's an expert. I know that you worked in pharma for the majority of your career. I know that one of our politicians celebratedly said that we've had enough of experts. I'm like, when it comes to hard scientific data on the climate crisis, I will trust the experts every day of the week.
That seems fair to me as well. I've no doubt we've touched on a number of these through that conversation. But if you were to pick either out of that conversation or bring something new in, what are the three drivers that you would point to that underpin the idea of climate chaos and how business sustainability should be playing a key role in helping us become more sustainable?
I think I bring to the table 2 data points and then some lived reality. So the first data point, and by the way, you know, I'm not prioritizing these 1, 2, and 3. They're in no particular order, but the first data point I don't think we can ignore is the research that was published by the World Wildlife Fund in 2020, that there has been 70% biodiversity loss since 1970 in the last, 54 years now. And that has huge bearing on the supply and availability of our natural kind of foodstuffs, fundamentally, because if you think about something as tiny as a pollinator in your garden, if there are 70% less pollinators, then the natural techniques that we rely on for the creation of vegetable, food resources is at risk.
Yeah.
I read a book last month, and it was called, the book's called The Sixth Extinction, published in 2014 by an American author, Elizabeth Colbert, and she was highlighting the extent to which toads and frogs are at risk globally because of a fungus that would have been kept local, but for the mass adoption of cheap flights and obviously human travel.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I mean, and I know David Attenborough has done a brilliant job to try and showcase that, but that is very, very alarming to me, not simply as an animal lover, a nature lover, but fundamentally that pendulum swing is destabilizing our global food system one way or another. The second point that I can't stop, I think about every time I'm asked this kind of question is the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report, which I think came out in 2021, and their opening statement appeared as this: it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. And again, if you think about the extent of scientific research that will have gone into the production of that report, you can't publish unverified scientific data. So I trust the word of the scientists. We are in deep trouble. And then bluntly, and I know that some of these things were going on before 2020, but if you look at extreme weather events since 2020, and by the way, many believe that the pandemic has been caused by, in its original form, deforestation. The virus was uncovered, somewhere in the dark depths of China, then taken to a lab, then leaked out of a lab. Whether or not it had been toyed and tampered with is, only time will tell. But the point being, would that virus have would it have come into human contact if we had left the natural world alone, is anybody's guess. But, going back to my original point, the scale and volume of natural climatic events since 2020 cannot be underestimated. Forest fires and the decimation of nature in Australia, in North America, in Northern Europe. We had ourselves, we consider ourselves, one of our defining traits as Brits is that we like to moan about our ever inclement weather. But, 2-3 summers ago, we had 40-degree temperatures and we had forest fires coming right up to the edge of London, like heath fires. The problem that we have is that the pace of life moves so quickly, we forget the past. We forget the troublesome past really easily, don't we? We want to avert our gaze and not think about the reality of the water that we're swimming in. But these are unavoidable realities. And if we want our children and our children's children and our children's children's children to be here in 50, 100 years' time, we have to act responsibly. We have a responsibility to future generations. Mindlessly consuming the media narratives about mindless consumption is not the answer to the deep discomfort that we find ourselves in. And I read a brilliant quote from somebody who's been at the forefront of climate activism for decades, maybe sort of 6 months ago, and I found it bizarrely very reassuring. The gist of it was something along the lines of, if you wake up in the morning and you are feeling a deep, unquantified, unqualified anxiety that you cannot put your finger on, that is your innate humanity recognizing the human interconnectedness with the rest of nature and recognizing the extent to which everything is out of kilter. It's like at a cellular level, we know things aren't right.
Fascinating.
I mean, I know there are plenty that would say, what a load of babble. But at this point in the proceedings, I'm open to all options.
Perhaps not a big stretch when we know that animals have senses that allow them to change their behavior based on all sorts of criteria, the weather, for example, and humans are just, I was going to say smart animals, but evidence might suggest not necessarily so smart all
But
of the time, but you know what I mean.
isn't that just so fascinating? That is really, really fascinating because it implies that intuitively animals are adaptive. Yet where we sit at the moment, our overarching political and media narratives are almost encouraging us to remain in stasis, and we cannot remain in stasis.
What's really interesting to me, actually, there are a couple of things as well as the kind of the discussion generally. One of the things that we said we do when we get to talk about the scenarios is kind of park the dystopian stuff, and much of what we've been talking about as kind of leading us down that sort of dystopian path. It's important that we don't forget what's underpinning the direction that we're traveling in. And I guess the other is how interconnected everything is. I mean, we said that right at the beginning, and we've kind of moved away from the stronger connection that you described really nicely earlier on between business and climate change, and focused very much on a much more kind of systemic perspective, I guess, of the interrelationship between humans and the climate crisis. But I want to bring us back to what we set out to talk about, which is this kind of relationship between business and the climate chaos. And optimistically,
Yeah.
how do you see the future panning out in 2030 and beyond if we start to get some of the things we've been speaking about right?
I think there's massive opportunity. I think we're only at the very edges of what we could achieve collectively. I do think that we have to start opening ourselves up to different models, different economic models that would more optimally serve us as a species than the ones that have been created for us that we have become immersed in since the Second World War. So as a for instance, what could work look like if we migrated to a circular economy? The work of Kate Rayworth and others in her field, there's some fantastic things to be thinking about there. And even if we were just to apply the thinking of, donut economics and the circular economy to the way in which we make decisions in our workplaces, I think that would have a phenomenal impact on how we go about our day-to-day business. If we were to ask ourselves, for every decision that we make in every aspect of work, what is the carbon impact of this decision? What is, for instance, the socio-economic impact? Because every action has a reaction, which is obviously part of systems thinking. So let's start thinking about, if we make this decision today, what are all the possible unforeseen consequences? I mean, this does take us, I know, into the realms of scenario planning, which you and I both love and appreciate. But I think if we would just start asking ourselves more intelligent questions at work, you know, for me, sustainable business is about so much more than the work that a sustainability person or team or department is responsible for. We are all responsible. And not only that, you know, those of us who are awakened to the climate crisis, and there's some really interesting data about the extent to which people are anxious, climate anxious. You know, if we were to convene regular get-togethers in our workplaces to talk about what we could do, I think people will bring gallons of ideas, because they will bring things that they're doing at a micro level in their home lives, you know, those little tiny things that they have done to try and lessen their own carbon footprint. I mean, some really small examples. These are such tiny examples. They're hilarious that I'm mentioning them now. But, you know, a couple of years ago, I stopped using cotton cleansing wipes, and I've now got reusable ones. And my daughter's got reusable ones. They go in the wash, they get washed, you reuse them. You know, I get my shampoo and conditioner from a refiller rather than buying fresh products. You know, all these little things. If you were to run chat sessions in work, you know, if everybody came to those chat sessions to share their little micro life hacks, imagine what impact that could have collectively. So there's lots that we can do there. And the other thing is that for years now, we have lived in a world where we have been told that consumerism will make us happier. But the scientific data shows that's not true. Love, friendship, and relationship makes us happier. So let's also have conversations about what makes us happy as a collective, and the mere act of connection, like you and I are having a really deep conversation, and I would wager that we're both getting, you know, a neurochemical kick from this conversation, because we are deeply connecting as we are talking with one another. We're getting a rush of good hormones as we're talking to one another. We are social creatures. We can withstand extremities when we act in communion, in community with one another. So, you know, that's another piece. And I think, you know, the bar is quite low right now. We have so many things that we could do to raise the bar. I'm a massive fan of marginal gains. I'm not a fan of making things sound unwieldy and unachievable, because I think that's just a stalling tactic. You know, if we all just strove for 1% better, we would make inordinate progress. So therein lies, I am optimistic, because, you know, what choice do we have, right?
Yeah,
What choice do we
I
have?
think that as well when we talk about climate. You know, it's quite simple in the end, really, isn't it? You know, we have no choice.
Right.
I mean, I suspect again we've started to touch on some of the things that you might suggest, but what sort of actions could an organization take right now with the insight that
Yeah.
hopefully we've shared to people listening about balancing the organizational activity within the context of the climate crisis?
So here's what I think. If you consider yourself to be a responsible employer in any way, shape, or form, I think it's irresponsible to ignore the reality that at least some of your people will be experiencing climate anxiety right now. And therefore, the most immediate thing that you could and should do, in my view, is to enable and facilitate either focus groups, deliberative dialogue sessions, but open up the conversation. Because when people are left to deal with suppressed stress and anxiety, it inhibits their potential to deliver results for you. So you're doing yourself a disservice by keeping a lid on these difficult conversations. So I would, if it was me, I'd be all out for, let's get the conversation flowing. Let's reignite the vibe that we're all in it together. There are no easy answers, but if we are in community with one another, suddenly things seem a little bit less onerous than they might have done previously. Another thing to bear in mind on this score is that ethically minded, highly skilled workers are voting with their feet as to who they choose to work for, which means it's really incumbent on you as an employer to demonstrate your carbon credentials and to have an authentic, credible story about the steps that you are taking to reduce carbon emissions. Because people are asking those questions now when they are considering job applications. I think we cannot support greenwashing in any way, shape, or form. We are seeing the emergence of climate quitting, where employees will just quit employers that do not exhibit the right attitudes and behaviours towards the climate crisis. So I think, don't think of this as a leadership conundrum where your elite squad of thinkers have to resolve this problem. Open it up to everybody. Open it up and start listening. Let everybody speak their truth. Get it out there. We know from what we've learned about, therapeutic interventions, being able to voice your thoughts is empowering. It's like a problem shared is a problem halved. I mean, all the cliches, right? So get everybody involved, be open and share what your organization is doing to track and reduce carbon emissions, and start these ongoing internal conversations to uncover all the great ways, all the additional great ways beyond simply carbon measurement that your entire team have about more sustainable ways of doing business. It's too unwieldy for the elite squad of thinkers. We have to harness the collective intelligence. And my God, every time I have conversations with people, 20, 30 years younger than me, I'm inspired by what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're thinking. We have so much untapped potential to leverage to address these issues when we ask the right questions to the right people.
I absolutely love that idea of listening, and arguably there's not enough listening going on, not just around this issue, but many. Kat, that's been absolutely superb. What a wide-ranging conversation once again. So thank you so much for your time. In the podcast description, you'll find a link to Working the Future website and contact information for Kat. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a future episode, and do tell your friends and colleagues all about the Informing Choices mini pod. We'll see you on another episode very soon.